Whew. If Silent Hill had a baby with the Blair Witch Project, that baby's name would be Alan Wake 2. This game is something special, and I mean properly special. I don't remember feeling this strongly about a horror game since Silent Hill 2, which was 2001. It's such a huge step up from the original Alan Wake game that I don't even know where to start.
Back to the beginning. We all come to a story with hopes and expectations, looking for an answer. Sometimes it would be better to live with that hope without ever knowing the full story.
I'm playing on the PlayStation 5 and have been blown away by the quality of the graphics. And then I saw what it can look like on a top-end gaming machine, and I've got to tell you, I am seriously considering rebuilding my rig just for this game. But even on the PS5, this game looks truly impressive. The quality of the scenery and the environment gets a massive thumbs up from me, but the thing that really seals the deal is the facial expressions on the characters. They are just absolutely superb. The Alan Wake series are games that demand immersion, and the graphics play a huge part of that, and Alan Wake 2 has got that absolutely spot on. You genuinely feel like you're playing in the game, and every now and again you come across a bit of scenery, you just take a step back and say, wow, this looks fantastic. Everything in the game works really well together to create that deep feeling of immersion. And whilst graphics do play a big part of that, the most impressive part for Alan Wake 2, as far as I'm concerned, has been the sound. If you have the opportunity to, you should really consider playing this game with a decent set of headphones. I played the first half hour or so through the sound on the telly, and whilst that was great, I had to switch to headphones because, well, the kids went to bed and I didn't want to wake them up. And it completely transformed the game. There are parts in the first chapter or two where you're sort of lost in the woods and you're almost being hunted by, well, wolves. And I can't describe to you how extra terrifying it is to feel that you're being hunted, because you can't see where that wolf is all the time, but you can hear it. You can hear it moving around you, and whilst that does help you to be able to quickly get your flashlight and try and spot it before it jumps on you, it just made the whole thing feel so scary.
Even the animals are turning into monsters.
I've already lost count of the number of times where I've essentially jumped out of my skin, and I have now banned having drinks on the desk after what was nearly a very expensive accident when one of the Taken jumped out of the shadows at me. It's almost hard to believe just how much of a horror game this is compared to the original. They've took all of the best parts of the original and just stuck on a massive amount of horror, and it has really made the game. You don't have to spend too long in the game to realise that there are quite a few differences between the original and its much improved sequel. Starting with the torch, in the original game, you only had to point it at the Taken for it to start burning away at that sort of shadowy outline. You also couldn't run out of batteries. If you did deplete your last battery in the original, it would charge itself back up. That is not the same on Alan Wake 2. Once you run out of batteries, you have ran out of batteries, which means you can no longer shine your torch at the Taken, which means sometimes, if you have ran out, you've just got to run. And it is terrifying. There were a number of times where I had run out of batteries and I just had all of these shadowy figures in front of me doing their Alan Wake sound effects, and I couldn't do anything about it. I just had to run. And that is something that you don't get very often in games, and it is brilliant. There are also now maps that you can collect in this game, which when I first heard about that, I was a little bit like, well, that wasn't in the first game and you didn't really need it. Do you need it in the new one? Yes. Yes, you do. You definitely do. They are helpful, but they're not the be all and end all. There are still plenty of times where you are backtracking on yourself and looking for things and trying to find stuff that isn't marked on the map, and sometimes there'll be something that's marked on the map that you sort of scratch your head over again. Well, how do I get to that? The maps are very useful, but they're not overdone. We also have this really cool new feature called the Mind Place and the Writing Room. Those two places are essentially a mind palace and can be accessed by Alan Wake and Saga Anderson. The Mind Palace is really useful because Alan Wake is a complicated story, and having a place that you can keep going back to check what has actually happened in the story so far, as well as it giving you ideas of where to go next, is really, really useful. But it's a lot more than that, because the things that you pin on the board in those Mind Palace rooms also affect what's happening in the game at that moment. So it gets to the point sometimes where you change what's happening in front of you and one door might be open in one version of reality and closed in another. Which brings me back to the map problem, because you get to the point where that map isn't really that useful because you can't tell which version of reality the map is actually referring to. It gets quite complicated, but it's never at the point where it feels impossibly difficult. Just challenging. Alan Wake 2 is a game to take your time with. It's not one of those games that you rush right through the story to get to the end. This is a game of exploration, and there are so many things that you might miss if you don't spend the time looking for them. I spent probably way too long looking for these lunchboxes, I think in the first chapter or two, and I just couldn't find the last one. You get a little bit of assistance in knowing how many of those kinds of things there are to find by looking on the board, but that doesn't really give you all the help that you need. You've got to keep your eyes peeled. You've got to look for things that don't quite fit, and then next thing you know, you found your lunchbox. The game still uses its iconic glow-in-the-dark arrows to point for things that are of particular value. But even then, they aren't exactly the easiest things to find. The arrows point you in the general direction, but you've still got to do a little bit of looking around to be able to actually find the thing that it's pointing to. And sometimes you even need to interact with the scenery in ways that you perhaps hadn't thought was even possible in order to reveal what that thing is. The first Alan Wake game was all about story. The story carried you through the whole game. The gameplay was alright, it wasn't anything revolutionary, wasn't particularly exciting, and it got fairly boring as you went through. This is not just about story. This is when Remedy said, we've got this great game, we've got this great storyline, let's put all these other things on top of that and make it amazing, and they have absolutely succeeded in doing that. Before the release of Alan Wake 2, Remedy Entertainment did state that this would work as a standalone game and that you needed no prior knowledge of the first game to enjoy the sequel. And by some miracle, it seems like they've managed to pull that off, because it does hold your hand through what happened in the first game, but it doesn't go through every single minute detail. Which is great because as an Alan Wake fan, it's left loads and loads of little bits of treasure and nuggets and references to things that happened in the first game without it taking away any of the enjoyment or any of the understanding from a new player to the sequel. And the level designs are absolutely packed with these little references. I particularly enjoyed all of the Mr. Scratch graffiti that sprawled across New York when you get to play in that part of the game, as well as all of the little subway signs, which when you look closer, they aren't subway signs at all, they are bits of plot of the game. In terms of game difficulty, I'd say that Alan Wake 2 has stepped it up a little compared to the original. Playing through that and the remastered version, I probably died only a few times on normal mode. I have far surpassed that small number of deaths just on chapter 3 of the sequel. If you know, you know. But this game is not a one-trick pony. It's not great just because of how difficult it is, it's not great because of how amazing it looks, and it's not just great because of the story. This is one of those very rare games that brings all of those things together and creates a fantastically immersive, atmospheric campaign. Remedy Entertainment have absolutely hit the nail on the head, and do not be surprised if this is there as a serious contender now for Game of the Year. It was a little bit weird, I thought, that it was even shortlisted since it hadn't been released at the time, but now having played through a good number of hours of it, I can totally see why it's there. It absolutely blows Spider-Man out of the water as far as I'm concerned, and really its only competition is Baldur's Gate 3. Now, as I mentioned, I'm not all the way through the game yet. I'm on about chapter 7, I think, but I had to make this video now. This game is that good. It's probably one of the best games I've played in the last 5 or 6 years, possibly even longer, and I cannot wait to see how this story continues to twist, turn, and unfold. So if you're a big fan of Alan Wake, and if you're loving Alan Wake 2 just as much as I am, please do let me know in the comments section below. Give this video a like if you enjoyed it, and if you could find the time to subscribe, that would be great. Means a lot.